I never thought a simple apartment building could change the way I felt about my own life. It started like any other week. Quiet mornings, the smell of coffee drifting through the hallway, the soft echo of footsteps on tiled floors. Nothing special, just routine. The kind of place where everyone minds their own business. She was the landlady, mid-40s, calm voice, always composed. I used to think she barely noticed me beyond rent payments and maintenance notes. But one afternoon, something shifted. I was standing near the building entrance, scrolling through my phone without really reading anything. I'd typed a message to someone earlier, erased it, typed again, deleted again. It stayed in drafts, unsent. Like most things lately. That's when she walked in with a small stack of envelopes in her hand. She paused when she saw me. Not dramatic, just a natural stop. "Your electricity bill came in," she said gently. I nodded. "Thanks." A second passed. She didn't move immediately. Just looked at me, not in a way that felt heavy, but attentive. Like she was actually seeing the person instead of the tenant. "You've been working late," she added casually. It wasn't a question. I blinked. "Yeah, long hours." She gave a small nod, the kind that says I understand without promising anything. That was the first time I noticed her hands. Calm, neatly holding the envelopes. No rush, no unnecessary motion, just steady presence. I don't know why I started noticing details like that. Maybe because no one else had looked at me like that in a while. The coffee shop downstairs became our unspoken meeting spot. Not planned. It just happened. She'd sometimes stop there after running errands. I'd go there between shifts. One afternoon, she noticed my usual order before I spoke. "Still the same?" she asked, a faint smile forming. "Yeah," I replied. "You remember." She shrugged slightly. "It's not hard." But the way she said it made it feel like it mattered. Tiny things began collecting in my mind. The way she folded the receipt carefully instead of crumpling it. The way her eyes flicked briefly toward my hands when I spoke. The way she listened, not interrupting, not rushing to fill silence. Silence with her didn't feel awkward. It felt deliberate. I won't pretend I wasn't lonely. I didn't tell anyone that part. I had friends, conversations, noise. But at night, my apartment felt bigger than it was. I'd sit at my desk, phone in hand, staring at messages I never sent. Sometimes I'd type something simple like, "Hope you're okay." Then I'd stop, delete it, put the phone face down. It wasn't dramatic, just hesitation. Like I didn't want to bother anyone, or like I didn't think anyone was waiting. That changed slowly around her. Not because she tried to change anything, because she didn't. She treated me normally, but with attention, and that attention felt new. One evening, the building lost power during a rainstorm. Everything went quiet except for the rain hitting the windows. We stood in the hallway together, lit only by the emergency light. "It'll come back soon," she said. I nodded. The air felt different, smaller, closer. I realized we were standing closer than usual. Not touching, just close enough that I could notice the warmth of her presence. She looked at me, and for a second, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched. I noticed myself holding my breath. She adjusted the edge of her sleeve. A small, nervous movement I'd never seen before. Then she smiled softly. "You're not afraid of the dark, are you?" I tried to laugh. It came out quieter than expected. Not really. But my heart wasn't reacting to the dark. It was reacting to her being there. After that night, things felt different. Not obvious, just charged. When I returned a small package she'd accidentally left near my door, she opened the apartment slightly instead of standing outside. The doorway felt like a boundary and an invitation at the same time. "Thank you," she said. Her eyes lingered a second longer than usual. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost ignored it. But I checked. It was a message from her. Not about rent. Not about maintenance. Just one line. "If you're free tomorrow evening, would you like to join me for tea?" Nothing serious. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the screen. Tea. Nothing serious. The rain started again outside, soft against the windows. I looked up at her door. It was slightly open, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was about to step forward or step back. I typed a reply, then stopped, deleted it, typed again, and right before sending, I heard her voice from inside the apartment. "Are you still there?" The screen in my hand glowed in the dim hallway light. The message was ready. I just hadn't decided what kind of story I was about to step into. She didn't wait for me to answer the message right away. Instead, she opened the door wider. "Come in," she said softly. "The hallway is cold." I stepped inside, telling myself it was just tea. Nothing unusual. Just two people in a building waiting for the rain to calm down. Her apartment was simple, clean, warm lighting from a small lamp near the window. The sound of rain felt softer in here. She placed 2 cups on the table. Her movements were careful, almost thoughtful, like she didn't want to disturb the air. We sat across from each other. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The steam rose between us. I noticed the way she held her cup, both hands around it, as if the warmth mattered more than the drink. "You seem tired," she said. I almost denied it. That would have been easier. Instead, I nodded. "It's not really work," I admitted quietly. "Just feeling behind. Like everyone's moving faster than I am." She listened without interrupting. No advice. No correction. Just presence. After a moment, she said, "When I first took over this building, I thought I had to appear strong all the time. No mistakes. No softness." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I learned that people trust you more when you let them see you're human." That was the first time she shared something personal without being asked. I looked at her differently then. Not as the landlady. Not as someone older. Just as a woman who had probably carried more than she showed. She stirred her tea slowly. "I was married once," she added, almost casually. "It didn't end badly. Just quietly." The word quietly lingered. There was no bitterness in her voice. Just acceptance. But I felt the weight of it anyway. I knew that kind of silence. The kind that reshapes you without anyone noticing. I started to understand why this connection felt complicated. She wasn't just older. She had history, stability, a life already built, and I was still figuring out mine. Sometimes I caught myself imagining what people would say if they knew we were sitting here like this. A tenant in his 20s, a woman in her mid-40s, alone together in the evening. It wasn't wrong, but it felt exposed, especially because she was technically responsible for my apartment. That line mattered. I could lose the place, or she could feel pressured, or things could shift in ways neither of us intended. I told myself to stay careful. Yet when she laughed quietly at something I said, something small and awkward, I felt that caution weaken. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt close. The rain eased. She stood up to check the window, and I followed to help close it. The latch was slightly stuck. "Here," I said, reaching forward. Our hands met briefly while adjusting the frame. Not dramatic, just a touch. Her fingers were warm. We both paused for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she looked at me, steady, unreadable, but not distant. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was softer now. I nodded, but my thoughts weren't organized anymore. The air felt different again. Heavier. Not uncomfortable. Just aware. When I stepped back toward the table, she made a small comment about the tea being too strong. It was a light joke, but the timing felt intimate, like we were sharing something that didn't belong to anyone else. I smiled, trying to act normal. But inside, I felt the shift. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. Not as a tenant. Not as a younger man passing through. Just as someone existing in the same quiet space. As I prepared to leave later that evening, she walked me to the door. For a second, she didn't open it. She just looked at me. Her eyes held something steady. Not urgency, not regret. Just awareness. Then she reached forward and lightly adjusted the collar of my jacket. A small gesture. Almost motherly. Yet the touch lingered just slightly too long to be casual. "Be careful in the rain," she said. I stepped into the hallway, heart unsettled, while the door closed gently behind me. And standing there under the dim light, I realized something had changed, not in what we said, but in what we didn't. The story was no longer just about tea. It was about the space between us. After that evening, nothing officially changed, but everything felt closer. We started seeing each other more often, not by plan, just by coincidence that didn't feel like coincidence anymore. Tea became a habit. Short conversations in the hallway stretched a little longer each time. Still careful, still normal, until it wasn't. One afternoon, I was in the lobby when she came down the stairs. She paused when she saw me, then smiled. That quiet smile. I stepped toward her instinctively, then stopped, because someone else was there. A neighbor from the third floor. He glanced between us with casual curiosity. Nothing obvious. Just the natural look people give when they notice familiarity forming. She adjusted her posture slightly. Professional again. "I'll check the maintenance notes," she said evenly, addressing both of us. Her tone had shifted. Controlled. Clear boundaries. The neighbor nodded and left. The second the door closed behind him, the air changed. She didn't look at me right away. That bothered me more than anything. Later, I went upstairs to return a form she'd asked me to sign. When I knocked, she opened the door, but didn't step aside immediately. Our proximity felt different in the narrow frame. She held the door with one hand. "Is everything okay with the apartment?" she asked. I could hear something underneath the question. I hesitated. "Yeah, it's fine." A pause. Then, quieter. "Is everything okay with you?" That question landed harder. I wanted to answer honestly, but I saw the shift in her eyes, like she was reminding herself of something. Age. Role. Responsibility. She looked down briefly. "I don't want this to become complicated," she said softly. Not accusing, just careful. My stomach tightened. Complicated. The word felt like distance. "I'm not trying to make anything difficult," I replied. My voice sounded smaller than intended. Another pause. The silence stretched longer this time. She stepped back slightly, not rejecting me, but creating space. I noticed it immediately. The resistance wasn't cold. It was fear. Maybe hers. Maybe mine. That evening, I found her in the shared laundry room. It was empty except for the hum of machines and the smell of detergent. She was folding sheets carefully. I offered to help. She hesitated for a second, then nodded. We worked in silence. Our hands occasionally brushed while handling fabric. Each time, it felt louder than it should have. At one point, she laughed softly because we both reached for the same corner of the sheet. It was a small sound, but it broke something open. She looked at me longer than usual. Not playful, not distant, just searching. I noticed her breathing slow. Mine did too. I stepped closer without thinking, maybe to help fold properly. Maybe because the space felt natural. The room suddenly felt smaller. Her eyes dropped to my mouth for a fraction of a second. I saw it, and I knew she felt it too. Neither of us moved. My heart was loud in my chest. I thought about pulling back, about the building, the rules, the roles, but my feet didn't move. She lifted her hand slightly, maybe to adjust the fabric, but it paused halfway between us, almost touching my wrist. Her fingers hovered there. The air felt tight, unfinished. She whispered, barely audible, "This isn't simple." I swallowed. I know. The distance between us shrank again without either of us stepping forward. Her eyes flicked up to mine, longer this time. Her hand finally rested lightly on my sleeve, just for a second. Not gripping, not pulling, just there. We were close enough to feel each other's breath. Her gaze dropped to my lips again. Mine didn't move away. For a moment, just a heartbeat. I thought she might close the space. I almost leaned in, almost said her name, almost crossed the line. The washing machine beeped loudly. The sound startled us both. She stepped back first. Slowly, carefully. The moment shattered, but not completely. She looked at me one last time before turning away, and I realized the line hadn't disappeared. It had only become visible, too visible. The breaking point didn't arrive loudly. It arrived on a Tuesday. We were walking back from the small corner store near the building. Just groceries. Nothing meaningful. A normal evening. The sky was turning soft gray. Not rain, just the kind of light that makes everything feel quieter. She carried the bag. I offered to take it. She refused at first, then handed it over halfway down the block. That small exchange felt heavier than it should have. We sat on the bench outside the building entrance to rest for a minute. It wasn't planned. We just stopped there naturally, like two people who had nowhere urgent to be. A couple walked past us. Young, laughing, holding hands without thinking about it. I noticed. She noticed that I noticed. Neither of us commented. But something shifted. You're different lately, she said. Not accusing. Observing. I stared at the sidewalk for a second. How? She hesitated. Then, quietly. You look like you're waiting for something. I swallowed. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was waiting for permission. Or clarity. Or a sign that this wasn't just in my head. I felt a sudden wave of fear. Not of her, but of losing this connection entirely. What if this is wrong? I asked before I could stop myself. The words hung between us. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she folded the grocery receipt slowly, pressing it flat against her palm. That small action felt like control returning. Wrong how? She asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. I could see the conflict there now. Not regret. Guilt. For age. For authority. For the way people might interpret this. For the fact that I was younger. For the fact that she was responsible for my apartment. For the fact that feelings don't care about categories. I don't want you to feel like you have to be careful because of me, I said. A pause. I don't want to complicate your life. She looked at me longer this time. Something cracked, not dramatically, just slightly. You think this is only your responsibility? She asked softly. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was tired, honest. I'm the one who opened the door, she continued. The words were simple, but they carried weight. We both knew what she meant. A silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just exposed. The bench felt smaller. She turned slightly toward me. I don't regret talking to you, she said. That wasn't the confession. It was the beginning of one. Her hands were resting in her lap now, fingers lightly interlaced. I noticed how steady they looked, but her breathing wasn't as even. I try to tell myself this is temporary, she added. Temporary. That word hurt more than I expected, because I hadn't thought about an ending until she said it. I wanted to say something bold, something that would anchor us. Instead, my voice came out quiet. What do you want? It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. She looked at me then. Really looked. Not as landlady. Not as older. Not as anything defined. Just as a person standing at a crossroads. Her lips parted slightly. She seemed ready to answer. But then she stopped. The pause stretched. Long enough to feel like a choice. Her gaze dropped briefly to my hands. Then back to my eyes. And for a moment, just one, she leaned closer. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence again. Her voice was almost a whisper. If I say what I want, are you prepared for it? The question wasn't loud, but it changed everything. The distance between us had nearly disappeared. My heart was racing. I didn't move away. Neither did she. The air felt suspended. Her hand began to lift. Slowly, almost touching mine on the bench. The world felt far away. And in that breathless pause, with everything hanging in balance, I realized we were standing at the edge of something that couldn't be undone. She looked at me one more time and waited. What would happen if one of us stopped being careful right now? The day after that bench conversation, she didn't text. Not about tea. Not about anything. I told myself that was normal. People get busy. Work happens. Life moves. But the silence felt different now. Before, silence felt intentional. Now it felt like distance. I went downstairs twice that week. Once in the morning. Once in the evening. Both times, her office light was on, but she didn't come out. When I finally saw her in the hallway, she smiled politely. Not warm. Not cold. Just professional. I've been busy, she said quickly, before I could ask. She didn't mention the bench. Didn't mention the question. Didn't mention the almost. Her eyes didn't linger anymore. That was the part that hurt. On Friday, I noticed a new car parked near the building entrance. A man stepped out. Mid-40s. Calm. Familiar posture. He walked inside without hesitation. I felt something tighten in my chest. Later, I heard voices from her apartment. Low, steady conversation. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just history. I didn't mean to listen, but the hallway was quiet. I caught fragments. She's growing up. It's not about that. I just want stability. Then silence. A door closing. The next day, I stopped showing up at the coffee shop. Not intentionally. I just didn't go. When routine breaks, it feels like falling without moving. My phone stayed face down on my desk. No messages from her. No invitations. Nothing. I typed something once. Are you okay? Then deleted it. Because what if she wasn't? What if the man wasn't just a visitor? What if there was a child? What if I had misread everything? The uncertainty felt heavier than rejection. When I finally saw her again, it was in the building lobby. She looked composed, but tired. There was a faint distance in her expression, like she had decided something privately. She handed me a small envelope. Your lease renewal, she said. Her tone was steady. Too steady. I nodded. Okay. That was all I managed. She paused as if she wanted to add something. Her lips parted slightly, but instead of speaking, she stepped back. Just a small movement. Enough to feel like withdrawal. That night, I sat at my desk for a long time. The envelope unopened in front of me. My phone in my hand. Her name on the screen. I typed a message. Can we talk? My thumb hovered over send. I imagined her response. I imagined the man's presence. I imagined responsibility. I imagined losing the apartment. I imagined being the reason something complicated unraveled. The message stayed unsent. 2 days passed. I didn't see her. Didn't hear her voice. Didn't knock. One evening, I passed her door. It was quiet inside. The hallway light flickered softly. For a moment, I raised my hand. Almost knocked. Almost asked. But I lowered it again. Because maybe she had chosen distance. Maybe that was her way of protecting both of us. Or maybe she had decided this was a mistake. I didn't know. And not knowing felt worse than knowing something painful. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. Her chair in the office remained empty when I walked by. The coffee shop table where we once sat was occupied by strangers. My phone stayed silent. One night, I typed a final message. If you meant what you said, I'm still here. I read it twice, then deleted it. The screen went dark. And for the first time since this began, I realized something quietly terrifying. Maybe this story wasn't about us growing closer. Maybe it was about learning when to stop. The hallway outside my door stayed empty, and I didn't know whether to wait or let go. It happened in the evening, when the building felt slower. I didn't plan to knock, but I also didn't plan to keep walking past her door again. This time, the light was on. I stood there longer than I should have. My hand hovered near the wood. I thought about the envelope, the silence, the man's voice I'd heard through the wall, the lease renewal sitting unopened on my desk. I thought about how easy it would be to disappear into routine. Then I knocked, softly, almost unsure if I wanted an answer. The door opened. She looked surprised, but not startled, like she had been expecting this moment in some quiet way. We didn't smile at first. We just looked at each other. The hallway was empty. No background noise. No distractions. Just the space between us. Can I come in? I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Finally, she stepped aside. Inside her kitchen, the light felt warmer than usual. The kettle sat on the stove and used. She didn't offer tea immediately. Instead, she leaned against the counter, arms relaxed but guarded. I stood near the table. Neither of us sat. That felt intentional. I stopped coming downstairs, I said. She nodded once. I noticed. Silence. Not angry. Not awkward. Just real. I took a breath. I thought you were pulling away because I did something wrong. Her expression softened. You didn't. Another pause. She looked down at her hands briefly before speaking again. I was afraid. The word landed quietly. Not dramatic. Just honest. Of what? I asked. She met my eyes this time. Of becoming someone who ignores reality. Her voice stayed calm, but there was strain underneath. I have responsibilities, a reputation, a life that doesn't disappear because of feelings. I nodded slowly. I know, and I meant it. I kept thinking about how this looks, she continued. About age, about power, about whether I was crossing a line. She stepped closer to the table, but not to me. I don't want to take advantage of you. That sentence felt heavier than any confession. I realized then, she hadn't been rejecting me. She had been protecting both of us. I'm not here because I feel pressured, I said quietly. I'm here because I choose to be. My voice trembled slightly, but I didn't stop. I don't want this to be secret. I don't want it to be hidden. If it exists, it should exist honestly. Her breathing slowed. She looked at me for a long time. Not scanning, not judging, just absorbing. What if it costs something? She asked. It wasn't rhetorical. It was real fear. I thought about the apartment, about leaving, about change, about how nothing stable stays stable forever. I'd rather lose something honestly than keep pretending nothing happened, I replied. The room felt still. She walked toward the sink, turned it on briefly, then off, like she needed movement to think. When she turned back, her eyes were slightly softer. You make it hard to stay distant, she admitted. That was the closest she had come to saying what she felt. I stepped closer, slowly, giving her space to step back if she wanted. She didn't. We were standing within arm's reach now. No rush, no performance, just two people deciding. I waited. She did too. Then, quietly, she said, "Okay." Not dramatic, not surrender, just acceptance of the moment. Her hand reached out first, resting lightly on my forearm. Not gripping, just grounding. I exhaled, realizing how long I'd been holding my breath. There was no kiss, no declaration, just shared understanding. She gave a small, genuine smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. I returned it, and for the first time since this began, the tension wasn't about whether something would happen. It was about the fact that we chose to face it. Together. She squeezed my arm gently. "Okay," she repeated, softer this time. And that single word felt stronger than any promise. Time didn't rush after that night. It simply continued. Slowly, respectfully. We didn't become something different overnight. There was no dramatic announcement in the hallway. No sudden labels. Just small adjustments. She spoke to the building committee about transferring management responsibilities. Not because of us, but because she wanted clarity in her life. That change gave us space. I started paying rent early, not out of obligation, but because it felt good to handle my own ground without blur. The first week after we decided to be honest, we didn't see each other much. It felt strange, but not empty. One morning, I walked downstairs at 8:47 a.m. like I used to. She was in the lobby with a thermos. The same one she always carried. Black coffee this time. She looked up when she heard my steps. No hesitation, just recognition. "Still early?" she asked. I smiled. Still awake. That small exchange carried everything we had worked through, without needing to say it. We didn't rush into anything. Instead, we started doing what felt natural. Sometimes tea in her kitchen. Sometimes black coffee downstairs. Sometimes sitting on the bench outside after work. The same bench where everything had nearly changed. The bench no longer felt like tension. It felt like pause. We would sit quietly, watching people pass. No need to perform. No need to prove. Just presence. There were still differences. She had her world. I had mine. But the fear that once hovered between us slowly softened. We learned how to exist without hiding. Her laughter came more easily now. Not louder, just freer. I noticed she no longer adjusted her posture when neighbors walked by, and I stopped overthinking every message. If something needed to be said, we said it. If something felt uncertain, we asked. Not dramatically, just directly. One evening, months later, we stood in her kitchen again. The same space where the turning point had happened. The kettle was on. The rain tapped lightly against the window. She leaned against the counter, watching me stir my coffee. "You know," she said, "I used to think stability meant staying the same." I looked up. "It doesn't," I replied. She nodded slowly. Now we understood that stability can also mean choosing each other, repeatedly, in quiet ways. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. We didn't live in fantasy. There were real-world boundaries, real responsibilities. But the anxiety that once lived between us had transformed into something grounded. We were careful, respectful, intentional, and that made everything stronger. Love didn't arrive as fireworks. It arrived as consistency, as showing up, as not disappearing when things got complicated. Sometimes, when I walk downstairs at 8:47 a.m., she's already there with the thermos. She'll glance up and say, "Same time." And I'll answer, "Same time." That's our rhythm now. Nothing dramatic. Just shared mornings. Shared silence. Shared understanding. We still sit on the bench sometimes. The same bench. But now it feels like a place where two people made a choice and lived with it responsibly. Not impulsively. Not secretly. Earned. It's not perfect. Life never is. But it's warm. Grounded. Real. And when the day ends, and we're standing in the hallway before parting for the night, she'll give that small smile, the one only I seem to notice fully. And I'll return it. No speeches. No declarations. Just that quiet connection that survived hesitation, guilt, and fear, and became something steady instead. Before she closes the door, she sometimes says, softly, "Okay." And I always answer the same way. Okay. Because now, that word doesn't mean pause. It means we're here. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?